I feel like life has a bit of a tendency to get away from you. I worry someday if I'm not careful, I might look at myself in the mirror and not recognize who I am anymore. Change has a funny way of doing that, distancing you from what made you who you were, or at least what you thought did. But that's unavoidable. Life changes, places change, and so do people. You can try and run to avoid change, but sooner than later, it's just gonna catch up to you. Time's gonna beat on, and all you can do is just try to keep up, leaving you with really just one question. After it's all said and done and the change has been made, are you still the same person you were? Or are you something altogether new? Even though change is scary, I can't stop something when I'm in the middle of it. I mean, even the window's not finished. Just look at it. Sure, it's in there and the silicone's all dry, but it has no trim on it. So if I'd like it to look like it was intentional, I need to fix that. Thankfully, putting the trim on it is a lot less nerve-wracking than cutting the initial hole was. Really, it's just a matter of measuring twice and hopefully cutting once. How hard could it really be? I spent a good amount of time cutting the trim, and sadly, that's not even where the cutting's gonna stop. I'd like the trim to sit flush with the wall as opposed to sit on top of the siding. It'll look better and it'll seal water better that way. All I need to do is trace it out, then carefully make some space, making sure not to cut through the wall again. With the proper sized hole for the trim, it was time to test fit it. So that's exactly what I did. And while these windows are listed as being square, the part where the trim is going to sit is a little taller than it is wide, meaning I'll need to play around with what pieces look best where. The good news is they all fit. Sadly, I can't install them yet. It was suggested that I put another layer of flashing tape between where the window meets the wall. The sealant that's on there now should seal it just fine, but if I tuck the flashing tape under the siding, we're just gonna get some extra protection. So since I have a lot of it, I see no real reason not to. With the flashing tape in place, this side quest was nearing its end. Really, all that was left was to surround it with trim and go around the whole thing with sealant once more. This is a lot better than it was before, considering these weren't even here to begin with. They could definitely use paint, but the whole building could, so that's a story for another day. It's weird how this place is finally starting to feel like it's mine. It's still an endless list of to-dos, but hey, I'm making progress, and that's gotta count for something, right? Too bad my days of insulating aren't even close to being over. In fact, the next part I gotta figure out is gonna be quite a bit more interesting. The ceiling's where you lose most of the heat anyways, and given how old the building is, I think it's its own can of worms. From what I'm learning, the amount of insulation you can fit is greatly dependent on what you can actually stuff in there. That, and you have to figure out how much it weighs and all of that jazz. And that's where the specific issues of this building come in. Pretty much the entire thing is constructed out of 2x4s, which doesn't really give us much room for insulation. And I guess I could technically build an attic where the joists are, but honestly, I think I'd lose a lot of the charm of this building doing that. I don't want to turn this place into something that it's not, and I definitely don't want to make it feel smaller than it already is. So even if it is less efficient, if I want to keep the original charm, I'll need to get creative with how I do insulate this place. I'd hate to change this place so much that it loses what I liked about it to begin with. It's an old wood shop that I'm converting to a hobby shop. It's never going to be a black and white hypermodern showroom, and that wouldn't be my style anyways. So with that in mind, I jumped back into the world of research, once again in an oh-so-similar sea of conflicting opinions. And just like before, it seems like there's a number of ways I could do what I'm setting out to. Keep the charm of what this place was, keep it warm in the winter and moderately cool in the summer, keep it from feeling closed off, and most importantly, keep making improvements. Before I get to any of that though, I need to take all the junk off the joists. Time for more cleaning, in other words. It seems like the guy who was here before me stored pretty much whatever he wanted up here. From random lumber to the old garage tracks, it has it all. But now that it's no longer up there, it's time to start insulating the ceiling. And for that, I'm gonna use polystyrene boards. I looked into a number of ways that we could actually insulate the garage, and honestly, these seem to be the best out of all that I saw. This building is entirely made out of 2x4s. I don't think it was ever originally designed to be insulated. And because of that, I really don't know how much weight the joists or the rafters could even hold. So as much as I would like to put hundreds and hundreds of pounds of drywall or fiberglass up there, I don't honestly know how long that would hold, or if it would to begin with. But the drywall is a question for later. For now, I was just focused on the insulation itself, and the way we're insulating this place specifically. I plan to insulate the rafters as opposed to making an attic with the joists. I'll set it up so there's about 1.5 inches of airflow that runs the whole span of the board and connects with the venting in the overhang. That way we'll hopefully have enough airflow to not worry about mold. The shiny side is also going to be facing the roof so that we get the benefits of reflective insulation. And first things first, no, this won't be as perfectly insulated as a typical attic setup would be, but we can always see how this works and put another layer of foam if need be. Plus, insulating the rafters as opposed to the joists keeps the place feeling open. It keeps it like it was, helps fight the loss of its identity in the midst of all this change. Plus, if it really is not working as well as we'd hoped, we can just put another layer of this stuff right on top. It's super easy to work with, so that's not really a big deal. The roof is slightly longer than these boards are, so I will need to do a bit of filling. And I haven't fully decided if I want to use tape or foam or whatnot, but the goal is the same either way. Everything below the foam is considered conditioned space, so it needs to be as close to airtight as possible. Obviously, it's never going to be perfect, but the closer it is, the better it's going to insulate. The only airflow we want in this setup is that channel behind the insulation boards, which is there specifically so we don't have moisture issues. In this case, airflow is our friend. The whole time I was working on this, I was weirdly thinking about something that this had nothing to do with. Another moment in my life from the past, which is about as different as it could be from the present, but weirdly shares a similar emotional weight, a similar period of change. And that moment was when I graduated. You see, for the first 21 odd years of my life, I never really questioned what I was, what my goal was, my identity. I was a student, and that's what I spent most of my days doing. And I never had to question that identity because it was handed to me. It was all I really knew. For 21 odd years, I worked towards basically one goal: graduating with a degree. I never actually questioned what came next after I actually got there. But eventually, I got my degree. My entire life spent defining myself as a student, only for one day to no longer be able to do that. I honestly had no idea who I was anymore, at least internally. Time passed, and eventually I started to get a grasp of who I was. I was the same me, but different. For better or worse, I don't really know. But either way, I changed. I really wasn't the same person anymore. And weirdly, I feel those same exact feelings again right now. I mean, after graduating, my next goal was to buy a place of my own. I mean, that's part of the reason why I got a degree to begin with. And my life was pretty set before this happened. I was finally starting to understand who I was going to be as a person outside of school. But change is inevitable, and with the accomplishment of that goal, I think I went and flipped everything on its head again. I don't really know what comes next, what the next goal is. All I really know is that this is a similar period of change in my life as was graduating, and all I can really hope is that I don't lose the things I liked about myself in the process. It was a pretty long day of work, but after it all, the ceiling is officially insulated. Well, other than sealing it with foam or tape, but that's what another parts run is for. Either way, this portion was done enough that I could move on to the next unknown. And from what I've heard, this one has quite a bit more of a learning curve, but I think it's at least worth starting. What material to finish the garage walls with was really only a question up until I saw the price of plywood. As much as I like the look of wood, 3 times the price per square foot is just a little bit much. That money could be much better spent on the project cars. Plus, learning to work with drywall is something I've been wanting to do for a while, and there's no better time than the present. I've heard a lot about drywall, and similar to everything else in this project, everyone seems to have a different opinion. Drywall's easy. It's difficult. Some people love to work with it, and other people won't even consider it. So I'm pretty curious where I'll sit on that spectrum. Either way, what I do know going into this is that it is delicate and time-consuming. So I have zero expectations that I'll be finishing this today. Really, I just want to hang a couple sheets and start learning how the material feels to work with. I'm assuming I'll mess up a number of panels in the process, but honestly, a worthy price to pay for something that I'll likely be doing a lot of work with in my life. I figured I'd start with this corner. It needs to sit about ½ an inch off the ground, and while you could use a normal drill bit to hang it, they do make a specialty one that helps you sink it the proper amount. And then it's really just a matter of screwing it into the studs. And my goal was to keep only a little bit of pressure on each individual screw until there were a number of them in the board. It's pretty easy to pull them through if you're not careful, and then you have to start all over. So I took my time, spaced them as evenly as I could, and before I knew it, I was onto the second panel. And this one required cutting. Sadly, the garage isn't exactly 2 sheets wide. So I used the T-bar and this extremely aggressive saw to simply score the top. I could have used the saw to cut the whole thing, but this stuff snaps straighter than it cuts, so no reason not to do that. Then it was simply a repeat of the same hanging process. Wow. It was at this exact moment that I realized I was at another crossroads. Since I insulated the rafters as opposed to building an attic, I have to decide how far up I want to take the drywall on this wall. I see 2 real options, and they both really hinge around the triangle above the wall and below the ceiling. I could either treat it as part of the ceiling and use whatever material I use to finish it, or I could treat it as a continuation of the wall. Extend the studs with 2x4s, insulate it with fiberglass, and run drywall the whole way up to the point. And honestly, that sounds like it would look a lot cooler, but I don't have the materials for it. So the furthest this wall's gonna get is measuring for the remaining materials I'll need. My drywall goal for today wasn't at all to finish the place. I really had no intention of that whatsoever. My real goal was to just start practicing with it. I don't want to rush it, but I need to learn the skills at some point. Like, what do you do with an outlet? Or how do you hang a sheet on top of another one? It's that kind of stuff that I'll need to practice. And it's that kind of stuff that I'll get better at simply by trying. Even if I mess up, I'll do it better the next time. The outlets are a great example of that. I used the $4 drywall saw I bought for the first one, but quickly realized by the time I got to the second panel that the oscillating saw I used for the window would work much, much better. So that's what I used for the next two. My time today was almost over, and the only other skill I really wanted to try was hanging a sheet on top of another. In theory, it's really not that bad, but in practice, these sheets are a little unwieldy. They're not light, and unless you're putting constant pressure on them, there's a good chance they're gonna slip, fall, and shatter. So my technique was to simply lean on it the whole time and pray that I didn't crack it with my body weight. And thankfully, at least for this one, it worked out alright. Then it was just a matter of making sure there were enough screws to hold it in place before actually letting go. I keep thinking back to that moment when I graduated and had to redefine who I was as a person. That goal I'd worked towards for a long time was accomplished. I didn't know what there was to work towards next. I liked my life back then, and I liked the version of me that was a student. But back then, my biggest fear was changing so much with the times that I lost sight of what I actually liked about myself. Became something I wasn't. Became a different person. Life changed, and I knew I had to change with it. And to be honest, I feel a similar fear right now. But the big difference now is I've been through it before. If I never had to question who I was after graduating, I wouldn't be the person I am today. And I definitely wouldn't have all the hobbies I currently do. Those years after graduation were transformative. The decisions I made during them are what made me who I am today. And honestly, I think that's going to be the exact same for these next periods of change going forward. It took me a while, but I've come to realize that people aren't static. And for that matter, neither are ideas. Who you are as a person is never really set in stone. Well, that's only a half-truth. It is if you want it to be. It's possible to choose not to react to those things happening around you. But if you do that, you're never gonna change. And what that means is you're never gonna grow as a person. But you also don't want to swing too far the other way and be purely formed based on the events that happen to you. Then you've got no choice in the matter. I feel like there's some sort of a balance. Like you need to reflect on the change that's happening around you, letting some things impact who you are for the better, but also making sure not to lose sight of what you were and those parts of who you were that you want to keep. I guess at the end of the day, change is inevitable. I don't know who I'll be in 10 years. I don't know what my interests, my job, or anything like that'll be. I'll end up being a different person no matter if I want to or not. All I can hope for is this. I want to be the kind of person that I would look up to right now. And I think figuring out how to get there is a more than worthwhile next goal. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider dropping a like and subscribing for more. That's the best way you can help support me and my content. Either way, I'll see you guys in the next episode. Thank you again. Have a wonderful day.